Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction and to the organizers for having me here. I actually dislocated into an Alpine region to give this talk, to be really in the mood, so I hope the internet connection also holds up. Allow me a quick introduction. So I'm very much looking forward to speak to you about the very specific topic, that being the social acceptance of utility scale solar PV projects in Alpine region. Just a very quick introduction of why we chose to look into this topic of solar projects in high altitudes. One very pressing topic in the overall energy transition is the question of how to meet electricity demand also during winter season. And apart from diversification across technologies such as wind, solar, biomass, for example, also geographical diversification is another possibility to address the seasonality issue. And for solar power in particular, locating them utility scale projects in high altitudes such as Alpine regions in Switzerland, for example, you can see a possible example of what a project could look like here on the slide. This could actually allow for an increased share of electricity generation during the winter half year. Alpine regions benefit from up to 50% more sun irradiation than lower levels. They have less fog, lower temperatures, and also greater snow reflection than, of course, lowland areas. And that altogether makes them a very promising location for solar PV projects. However, as you can imagine, and you see it also here on the slide, similar to wind farms, large solar PV projects also change the landscape. They may therefore also cause social acceptance issues. And in contrast to the very wide literature, which we have also seen a bit of it before on wind energy, social acceptance of solar power has so far received less attention. With this paper, we wanted to add insights to the debate, and I'm very happy to share some of our insights on the approach, on the results, and also on the conclusions. All right, let's start off with the topic of solar energy and social acceptance. As mentioned before, large solar projects can also change the landscape and may also face, of course, social acceptance issues similar to wind energy projects. We have also seen in various papers in literature that the sensitivity regarding changes in Alpine regions tends to be higher also compared to other regions, as people kind of see that landscape as leisure areas, as tourist attractions as well. And as mentioned as well before, we have a very wide selection of papers in the area of social acceptance for wind energy so far, a bit less in the area of solar energy, and that's what we wanted to address. So we came up with the following three research questions. We wanted to see how high the social, political, and also the community acceptance for utility scale solar PV projects in Alpine regions are. We also wanted to see what are the different determinants of social acceptance of utility scale solar PV projects in those mountainous regions. And lastly, we also wanted to look at which elements of such a project can increase its social acceptance. We then, of course, took a first deep dive into literature. There is several already papers and research pieces published. One of our institute's research projects recently showed that we, of course, have very high levels of social acceptance for the expansion of solar energy on an international level, but also on a national level. So very high levels for social acceptance of solar energy, which can also be found in other papers. In the same survey, we can also see that people are, to a large extent, very proud to see a solar project installed near them. This is significantly higher than, for example, for wind energy projects. This led us to our first hypothesis. As we can see from this, but also from other research projects, solar PV projects are associated with a very high social political acceptance, and we have the hypothesis here stated that also this holds true for projects being installed in Alpine regions. Secondly, as discussed surely also during the day, procedural and distributional justice are very important elements within the literature. And we also see in different research projects that the high degree of distributional and procedural justice can positively influence a project's social acceptance. We therefore also included this as hypothesis. So we have two different ones here stating that distributional justice, a high level of it, can increase social acceptance, and also similarly, of course, also for the procedural justice that we have the hypothesis here that also a high level of procedural justice can lead to a higher social acceptance of such a project. Lastly, another important element within the whole literature of social acceptance is, of course, the visual impact of such projects. It's one of the very frequently cited negative effects, mainly, of course, for wind energy projects, but also for large ground-mounted solar projects. For solar energy in particular, we also see that researchers have examined the influence of different attributes such as color, glare, and texture. And one very novel way, which we also want to address, which we addressed also, is the question of solar art. I don't know if you have seen them, but there is many very nice looking pictures, for example, from China, where they build huge solar plants in the shape of a panda, for example. But there is also one, for example, in France, where it looks like a Disney puppet in front of Disneyland. So there is like a new element of solar art also kind of coming up in the discussion of kind of addressing visual impacts. We therefore stated the following two hypotheses for our third hypothesis. Adjusting the color to the natural surroundings can increase social acceptance, and also artistic elements could increase social acceptance of a PV project in Alpine regions. All right, so that's what we have for hypothesis for our project. Let's quickly look at how we approached those questions. The overall project we used as a methodology, the choice-based conjoint experiment. Everybody in the group of Professor Wüstenhagen once has to do a choice experiment, but of course I can tell you it's a very valuable experience. It's a great method to look at novel topics. So we had every participant he or she was put in a situation where she had to choose between 3 different solar Alpine projects with different attributes and levels, which I will show in a minute, and of course one non-option, which the person could choose whenever she felt like none of the 3 projects were acceptable for her or for him. We of course had a representative sample of over 1,000 people. It was representative in terms of age, gender, income, political party preference, and all those 1,036 participants, they carried out a total of 8,288 choice tasks. So one of the first large-scale study on social acceptance of utility-scale solar PV projects. As mentioned, the participants, they were put in a situation, they were shown a prototype of such a solar Alpine project. You see it here on the slide. We chose a nice mountainous area in Switzerland, and we gave them several kind of information on the project. It's around 6,000 square meter of size, so about the football pitch. It produces around 1.5 gigawatt hours, so it equivalent to like the production or consumption of 1,250 people. And importantly also, it's located near existing infrastructures. As you see here on the slide, it's near some cable cars, some other buildings. Then, as mentioned before, the choice experiment involves different attributes, different levels, which are of course then varied for each choice task. As mentioned here, we kind of selected those attributes based on our hypothesis and on other projects which have been done in the field of social acceptance. As mentioned before, the design element was included. The levels here are kind of differed between conventional solar panels, then green solar panels, and then the mentioned artistic elements, for example, animal design. Capricorn is the famous animal for one of our biggest mountain cantons here. And the fourth element was then the solar panel power plant in the design of a Swiss flag, which is also seen many times in the Swiss Alps, for example. Other elements included ownership, ecological impact, of course, and then as mentioned also the distributional and procedural justice, with all different elements from, let's say, from small to a very high degree, always deferred, of course, within the choice tasks. Just to very quickly show you how we kind of also visualize different elements, of course, participants were shown the design elements. So this is what it looks like to have a conventional solar panel project. This one, the green one, you can hardly see. You have to look very precisely on the slide even. And those two artistic elements then kind of looked like, like the animal design, and of course like the Swiss flag design. Those were kind of the 4 different levels for the design attribute. This is kind of what the choice experiment then looked like for the different participants. They had to choose, as mentioned, between the 3 projects and the non-option. In total, they had to do 8 of such choice tasks. And as mentioned here on the slide, they always also could use the mouse over function, so to get more information on the different levels. And as mentioned, they had to do it 8 times. Now, of course, we have seen what the different approaches look like. Now, let's look at the results. So you, of course, also asked kind of a basic acceptance question at the very beginning. We can see here already in colors. So we have a very high social political overall acceptance. 64% of all the participants would accept such an Alpine solar project. And in the overall sample, we also looked at the subsample of people actually living in Alpine regions. And here it's interesting, we find a so-called PIMBY effect, a please in my backyard effect. So people living in Alpine regions have significantly higher acceptance levels than the lowlanders. And just also mention one of the control variables, of course, as with many papers, also political attitude has an effect. So center and left voters are significantly more willing to accept such a project than compared to conservative voters. If we continue looking at the different hypotheses we stated, so the first one, we stated that solar PV projects are associated with a high overall acceptance. We can confirm within the kind of people living in Alpine regions, it's even higher. If we continue with our kind of choice experiment results, you can see them here on the right. These are kind of the importances of the different attributes. So which of the attributes was most important for the participants? And we can see here, design, ownership, and ecological impact are the top 3 attributes that define social acceptance of such an Alpine solar project. Design, very important compared to the other ones. We also see that a high level of distributional and procedural justice has a positive effect. It can help to increase social acceptance, but as we see here on the slide, other factors play a much larger role. And lastly, also kind of looking at the hypothesis here, we can only partly kind of confirm these because, as mentioned before, they have a positive effect, but other elements are, of course, much more important. Let's have a quick look at the different top 3 elements and also at the part worth utilities. So at the different element importances, we can see here, many people are always very curious about the design elements. So is the Swiss flag really helping the social acceptance? And sadly, Swiss flag is not helping the social acceptance. You can see here the green panels are the strongest favored element within the design attribute. So it has a high score of 75 compared to only 20 of the conventional panels, and then negative effects for the both artistic elements. So if we look at the hypothesis 3A, which we stated that solar artistic elements can also help to increase social acceptance. We have to state that at this moment, solar art was not yet well received by the respondents. Concerning ownership, it's interesting to see that local utility with the involvement of local people is the most popular ownership structure. Also for Alpine solar project, this is similar to other findings also for the wind energy. So again, looking at these two hypotheses, kind of adjusting the color, green panels, for example, to the green landscape, it helps strongly to increase social acceptance, whereas on the other side, new artistic elements have so far not been well received yet. This can still change, but as for now, this is not a way to increase social acceptance. Last slide at the results section. What is also very interesting to see here on the slide is that the non-option, so the top element on the right side of the slide, the non-option has a very negative value, a very strong negative value, which implies that this was hardly ever chosen. So it almost any time a project was preferred to no project at all. So this again supports our findings of the very high general acceptance level for such solar alpine projects. For the two other attributes, namely ecological impact, unsurprisingly also here the level with the least impact is the most popular, and also for the procedural and distributional justice, the highest level is of course the most favored one. All right, let me finish off here in time with some concluding remarks. In general, from our point of view, and also from a social acceptance point of view, solar projects in Alpine regions are a very promising option for more electricity production during the winter season. And from a policy point of view, it would be ideal to set also targets for solar PV generation in such Alpine regions on a national level, and also, of course, include the areas, potential areas in local planning procedures, as well as, of course, identifying such areas. And lastly, for project developers, it's as we have seen from our results, very important to include ownership models with a very strong local component, and also design the projects as close as possible to nature, namely design and ecological impact. And this leads us back to our original title, keep it local and low-key, in a sense of being adapted very closely to nature.